German Shepherd. Was crying for help in middle of busy road. What the baby did. Next left. Everyone in tears. What happened next will shock you completely. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. The story you're about to listen to will change how you see the world forever. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over Central Avenue and Riverside, turning the asphalt into waves of shimmering heat that made the air dance like liquid fire. Rush hour traffic crawled bumper to bumper, a symphony of honking horns, revving engines, and the occasional screech of brakes cutting through the thick, humid air. Motorcycles weaved dangerously between cars, their riders desperate to escape the suffocating heat that seemed to press down on the city like a heavy blanket. In the middle of this chaos, right in the turning lane, where cars made sharp left turns toward the shopping district, stood something that made drivers do double takes. A large German Shepherd, his golden and black coat dusty and matted, stood perfectly still despite the roaring traffic just inches from his body. But this wasn't the confident stance of a lost dog. This was something else entirely. The dog was crying. Not barking, not howling, but actually crying. A sound so human-like, it sent chills down the spines of anyone close enough to hear it over the traffic noise. His mouth was slightly open, and the sound that emerged was a desperate, pleading whimper that rose and fell like a person sobbing for help. His front right paw was scraped raw, a thin line of dried blood visible against his fur, but he seemed oblivious to his own pain. "Get out of the road, you stupid mutt!" shouted a taxi driver, leaning on his horn as he swerved around the animal. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, he took 3 careful steps toward the crosswalk, then stopped and looked back over his shoulder as if waiting for someone to follow. When no one did, he returned to the exact same spot in the center line, sat down, and let out another heart-wrenching cry. A woman in a red sedan rolled down her window and tossed a crumpled napkin at the dog. "Shoo, go home!" she yelled. The napkin bounced harmlessly off his back. He didn't even turn to look at her. His eyes, deep brown and filled with what looked like tears, were fixed on something beyond the traffic, something only he could see. More drivers began to notice. Some slowed down to get a better look, creating a minor traffic jam that stretched back 3 blocks. Others pulled out their phones, recording videos of the crying dog in the middle of the road. But nobody stopped. Nobody got out of their car. They just watched, filmed, and drove around him like he was nothing more than an unusual traffic cone. The dog's behavior was getting stranger by the minute. He would walk toward the crosswalk, stop, and make that awful crying sound. Then he would return to the center line, sit down, and repeat the process. It was as if he was begging someone specific to follow him, but that someone wasn't there. On the sidewalk, waiting for the pedestrian light to change, stood Maya Rodriguez with her 5-year-old son, Danny. Maya clutched her purse tightly, checking her phone for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. She was already running late for Danny's doctor appointment, and this traffic was making everything worse. Danny, meanwhile, was completely mesmerized by something else entirely. He pressed his small face against the metal pedestrian barrier, his rocket-shaped blue lunchbox dangling from his other hand, and stared at the German Shepherd in the road. "Mommy," Danny whispered, tugging on Maya's jacket sleeve. "He's saying help." Maya glanced down at her son, then looked toward the road where cars were still honking and swerving. "What are you talking about, sweetheart? I don't hear anything except traffic." But Danny's hearing was different. At 5 years old, his ears could pick up frequencies that adults had long since lost the ability to hear. And what he heard from that dog wasn't just crying, it was words. Actual words, spoken in a language that only children and animals seem to understand perfectly. "He keeps saying, 'Help them,'" Danny said, his small voice filled with concern. "He's scared, Mommy, really, really scared." Maya strained to listen, but all she could hear was the usual chaos of city traffic mixed with what sounded like a dog whimpering, nothing more. She was about to tell Danny to stop imagining things when something extraordinary happened. Danny cupped his small hands around his mouth, exactly the way the German Shepherd was positioning his muzzle, and made the same sound, the same crying, pleading sound that had been echoing across the intersection for the past 10 minutes. The effect was immediate and electric. The German Shepherd's head snapped toward Danny's direction. Their eyes met across 4 lanes of traffic, and for a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Something passed between them. understanding, recognition, hope. The dog stood up, his tail wagging just slightly, and took 2 steps toward the sidewalk where Danny stood. Then he sat down again and let out a different sound, still urgent, still desperate, but now directed specifically at the little boy who had somehow heard him when no one else could. A small crowd began to gather on the sidewalk. An elderly man with a walking cane stopped to see what was happening. A teenage girl on roller skates slowed down, pulling out her earbuds. Even the hot dog vendor across the street was craning his neck to get a better view. "That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen," muttered the man with the cane. "It's like they're talking to each other." Maya felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the oppressive heat. There was something happening here that she didn't understand. Something that went beyond a simple lost dog causing a traffic disturbance. The way her son and Small, this animal, were looking at each other. The way Danny seemed to know exactly what the dog was trying to communicate. It was impossible, but it was happening right in front of her eyes. The pedestrian signal changed, showing the white walking man symbol. The intersection fell into that brief, precious moment when all the car traffic was stopped by red lights, creating a temporary island of relative quiet in the urban chaos. It was in this moment of stillness that everyone heard it clearly for the first time. The dog's crying wasn't random. It had a pattern, a rhythm, almost like he was trying to form actual words with sounds that his canine vocal cords weren't designed to make. And 5-year-old Danny Rodriguez, clutching his rocket-shaped lunchbox and staring across 4 lanes of stopped traffic at a German shepherd who was begging for help in a language only he could understand, made a decision that would change everything. "Mommy," Danny said quietly, his small voice somehow carrying clearly across the intersection, "he wants us to follow him. Someone needs help, and he's the only one who knows where they are." Maya looked down at her son, then at the dog, then at the growing crowd of people who had stopped to witness this impossible conversation between a child and an animal. The traffic light was about to change. Cars were already revving their engines, preparing to surge forward the moment the light turned green. In 30 seconds, the window of opportunity would close, the traffic would resume its relentless flow, and whatever was happening here would be lost forever. But something in her son's eyes, something in the desperate way that dog was looking at them, told Maya that this wasn't just a random encounter with a stray animal. This was the beginning of something that would test everything she thought she knew about the world, about the connection between humans and animals, and about the extraordinary things that could happen when someone, even someone as small as a 5-year-old boy, decided to listen when others couldn't hear. The light was about to change. The moment was slipping away. And Danny Rodriguez, with his rocket-shaped lunchbox and his ability to hear what others couldn't, was about to make a choice that would save lives, bring a community together, and prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. But first, he had to convince his mother to trust what seemed impossible, to believe in what couldn't be explained, and to follow a crying German shepherd into the unknown. Because somewhere in this city, someone was in terrible danger, and only this dog knew where to find them. The traffic light flickered from red to yellow, giving drivers the warning that green was coming. Engines revved impatiently, and the brief moment of stillness that had allowed everyone to hear the dog's desperate cries was about to shatter into chaos once again. Maya felt her heart pounding as she looked at her son's determined face, then at the German shepherd, who seemed to be waiting for their decision with an almost human understanding of the urgency of the moment. "Danny, sweetheart, we can't just walk into traffic because you think a dog is talking to you," Maya said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. There was something happening here that defied logic, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up, and her maternal instinct screamed that this was important. The light turned green. Cars began to move forward, but something incredible happened. Danny, without hesitation, stepped one small sneaker into the crosswalk just as the pedestrian signal showed the walking symbol. He raised his rocket-shaped lunchbox high above his head like a bright blue beacon, and somehow, impossibly, the lead car in the nearest lane saw him and slammed on its brakes. The effect rippled backward through traffic like dominoes falling in reverse. Car after car screeched to a halt, creating a gap in the middle of the intersection that shouldn't have existed. Horns began blaring, but not the angry honks from before. These were confused, questioning sounds from the drivers who couldn't understand why they had stopped. "What is that kid doing?" shouted a delivery truck driver, leaning out his window. But Danny wasn't paying attention to the drivers or their confusion. His entire focus was on the German Shepherd, who had risen to his feet the moment the boy stepped into the street. The dog's tail was wagging now, not with playfulness, but with relief. The kind of relief that came from finally being understood after hours of desperate attempts to communicate. Officer Sarah Patel, a traffic cop who had been directing flow at the intersection 3 blocks down, came running toward the commotion with her radio crackling. She was a 15-year veteran of the force, and she had seen plenty of traffic incidents, but nothing quite like this. "Hey!" she called out, jogging toward Danny and Maya. "What's going on here? You can't stop traffic for a stray dog." But as she got closer and saw the scene unfolding, Officer Patel slowed her approach. There was something about the way the child and the German Shepherd were looking at each other, something about the perfect stillness that had settled over what should have been a chaotic intersection that made her police instincts kick in. This wasn't just a traffic disturbance. This was something else entirely. Maya, her mother's protective instincts warring with a growing sense that her son was right about something she couldn't understand, stepped into the crosswalk behind Danny. Her hand hovered protectively over his shoulder as she watched him crouch down and extend his small palm toward the German Shepherd. "Stay," Danny whispered, using the only dog command he remembered from watching animal videos on his tablet. "It's okay. We're listening now." The German Shepherd approached, slowly, carefully, as if he understood that this moment was fragile and precious. When he reached Danny, he didn't jump or try to lick the boy's face like most dogs would. Instead, he pressed his warm nose gently against Danny's palm and let out a soft whimper that sounded almost like "thank you" in whatever language existed between children and animals. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown larger. Word was spreading through the nearby shops and cafes that something unusual was happening at the intersection. People were coming out of buildings, stopping their conversations mid-sentence, drawn by the inexplicable sight of a small boy and a large dog having what appeared to be a serious conversation in the middle of a busy street. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of living in this city," said Mrs. Chen, who owned the flower shop on the corner. She was holding her phone, recording the scene, but unlike the earlier drivers who had filmed with casual amusement, her expression was one of wonder and concern. Officer Patel reached for her radio, intending to call animal control and get the situation handled quickly. But Danny suddenly looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too serious for a 5-year-old. "No, Cage," he said firmly. "He's not lost. He's trying to show us where someone is hurt." "Kid, I understand you think you can talk to dogs, but we need to get this animal off the street before someone gets hurt," Officer Patel said, though her voice was gentler than it had been moments before. There was something about the boy's certainty that made her pause. The German Shepherd, as if he had understood every word of the conversation, suddenly moved. He walked to where Danny was crouched, pressed his collar tag against the boy's knee with deliberate intention, then took several steps toward the sidewalk. But he didn't head toward just any part of the sidewalk. He moved specifically toward a section where orange construction cones marked off a work zone around a series of storm drain grates. Danny stood up, his lunchbox still clutched in his small hand, and followed the dog's movement with his eyes. "He wants us to go there," he said, pointing toward the construction area. "Someone is down there, and they need help." Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. The construction zone had been there for weeks, part of the city's ongoing storm drain maintenance project. She had walked past it dozens of times without giving it a second thought. But now, looking at it through her son's eyes and watching the way the German Shepherd was focused on those specific grates, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon heat. A teenager on a bright yellow scooter, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, suddenly spoke up from where she had stopped at the edge of the crowd. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversations. "I think I heard something from those drains yesterday." Everyone turned to look at her. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 16, looked uncomfortable with the sudden attention, but she continued talking. "I was skateboarding past here around this time yesterday, and I heard this weird knocking sound coming from underground, like someone was tapping on metal pipes or something. I thought it was just construction work, but..." She trailed off, looking at the German Shepherd, who was now standing directly over one of the drain grates, whimpering and pawing at the metal grating with increasing urgency. "But what?" Officer Patel asked, her hand moving unconsciously toward her radio again, though this time not to call animal control. But there wasn't any construction crew working yesterday, the teenager finished. The site was empty. I remember thinking it was weird that I could hear noises when nobody was supposed to be down there. The crowd fell silent. Even the traffic, which had been growing more impatient by the minute, seemed to quiet as drivers strained to hear what was happening. Danny walked slowly toward the construction zone, and the German Shepherd moved with him, step for step, as if they were connected by an invisible thread. When they reached the first storm drain grate, Danny did something that made everyone's hearts stop. He pulled a small marble from his pocket, one of the cat's eye marbles he collected and always carried with him, and dropped it through the metal grating. The marble fell with a soft clink, then bounced once, twice, 3 times before disappearing into the darkness below. For several seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the street, came 3 distinct taps. Tap, 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 followed by what sounded unmistakably like a human cough. The German Shepherd threw back his head and let out a sound that was part howl, part cry, and completely heartbreaking. It was the sound of an animal who had been trying to tell humans something desperately important and had finally been heard. Officer Patel's radio crackled to life with routine traffic updates, but she barely heard them. Her training kicked in as she realized what they were dealing with. Someone was trapped in the storm drain system beneath the street and had been there since at least yesterday. The dog, somehow, impossibly, had been trying to get help for them. "Dispatch, this is Officer Patel at Central and 5th, she said into her radio, her voice steady despite the surreal situation. "I need emergency rescue units, paramedics, and public works at my location immediately. We have a possible person trapped in the storm drain system." As she spoke, more sounds drifted up from beneath the grate. Not just tapping now, but what sounded like a weak voice calling for help. The crowd pressed closer, everyone straining to hear, and Maya felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized her 5-year-old son had just helped save someone's life by doing something that should have been impossible. But the German Shepherd wasn't finished. As sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer, the dog moved away from the first grate and trotted purposefully toward a second one, about 20 feet away. He sat down beside it and began the same urgent whimpering, the same desperate pawing at the metal. Danny looked at his mother, then at Officer Patel, then at the growing crowd of people who were now completely invested in this unfolding rescue. "There's someone else," he said simply. "He says there are 2 people who need help." Maya's knees felt weak. 2 people, 2 separate locations. How long had they been down there? How had they gotten trapped? And how had this German Shepherd known where to find them when the entire city's emergency services hadn't even known they were missing? The first fire truck arrived with a screech of brakes and a blast of sirens, followed closely by an ambulance and a public works vehicle equipped with heavy lifting gear. Paramedic James Wong jumped out of the ambulance, took one look at the scene. A small boy, a German Shepherd, a crowd of people gathered around storm drain grates, and a traffic cop coordinating what appeared to be an underground rescue operation, and shook his head in amazement. "In 15 years of emergency response, I've never gotten a call quite like this one," he said as he approached Officer Patel. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Officer Patel gestured toward Danny and the German Shepherd. That dog apparently led that boy to this location and indicated there are people trapped in the storm drains. We've confirmed sounds from at least 2 separate grates. As if to prove her point, the German Shepherd left the second grate and moved to a third one, even further down the construction zone. His behavior was exactly the same: urgent whimpering, pawing at the metal, looking back at Danny as if asking him to translate for the humans who couldn't understand. James Wong had seen a lot of unusual rescue situations, but he had never seen anything like the communication happening between this child and this dog. As a trained paramedic, he knew that time was critical in any rescue situation, and if there really were people trapped underground, every minute counted. "How long do you think they've been down there?" he asked Officer Patel as his partner began unloading rescue equipment from the ambulance. "Based on what that teenager said about hearing sounds yesterday, at least 24 hours, Officer Patel replied. But it could be longer. The implications hit everyone at the same time. 24 hours or more, trapped underground, possibly injured, with limited air and no water. The German Shepherd's desperate behavior suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been causing a traffic disturbance. He had been staging an emergency intervention, trying everything he could think of to get human attention for people who couldn't save themselves. Danny, who had been quietly watching the adults organize their rescue efforts, suddenly tugged on his mother's hand again. "Mommy," he said, his voice small but urgent. "The dog says we need to hurry. The water is coming." Maya looked at her son with confusion. "What water, sweetheart?" Danny pointed toward a city maintenance truck that was just pulling up to the scene. On its side, in large letters, were the words "Storm Drain Management, Scheduled Maintenance." And underneath that, in smaller print that only someone standing very close could read, was a work order scheduled for today's date. Upstream valve release, 4 p.m. Maya looked at her watch. It was 3:42 p.m. The rescue teams were just getting started, and according to the maintenance schedule, in 18 minutes, water was going to start flowing through the storm drain system. If people were trapped down there, if they were in the path of that water flow, 18 minutes might not be enough time to get them out. The German Shepherd, as if he sensed the growing urgency, moved between all three grates he had identified, whimpering and pacing in a pattern that spoke of pure desperation. He knew something the humans were just beginning to understand, that this rescue had just become a race against time, and every second counted. Officer Patel was already on her radio, calling for the storm drain maintenance to be delayed. But city bureaucracy moved slowly, and there was no guarantee the message would reach the right people in time. The rescue teams were working as fast as they could, but getting heavy equipment in place, opening the grates safely and extracting people from underground was a process that typically took hours, not minutes. Danny walked over to the German Shepherd, who was now visibly shaking with stress and exhaustion. The boy reached out and placed his small hand gently on the dog's head, and somehow, impossibly, the animal calmed slightly at his touch. "It's okay," Danny whispered. "We heard you. We're going to help them. You did good." The German Shepherd looked up at the 5-year-old boy, who had been the first person to understand his desperate message, and in his deep brown eyes was gratitude, relief, and a trust so complete it took Maya's breath away. But they weren't finished yet. The real rescue was just beginning, and with water coming through the system in less than 17 minutes, everyone was about to discover just how extraordinary the bond between a child and an animal could be when lives hung in the balance. The scene at Central and Fifth had transformed from a simple traffic disturbance into a full-scale emergency operation in less than 10 minutes. Fire Captain Rodriguez had arrived with the heavy rescue unit, and his team was already working to secure the area and assess the situation. Yellow emergency tape fluttered in the hot afternoon breeze, creating a barrier between the rescue operation and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Give me a status report," Captain Rodriguez called out to Officer Patel as his team began unloading hydraulic lifting equipment and emergency lighting systems. "We have confirmed sounds from 3 separate storm drain locations," Officer Patel replied, checking her notes. "Possible multiple victims trapped underground. The dog indicated the locations, and we've verified human responses from at least 2 of the sites." Captain Rodriguez paused in his coordination efforts and looked over at Danny, who was still standing beside the German Shepherd near the first grate. In 30 years of emergency response, he had learned to trust unusual sources of information when lives were at stake. But this was something entirely new. "The dog indicated the locations?" he asked. Before Officer Patel could respond, Paramedic Wong approached with his portable audio equipment. "Captain, I've been monitoring the sounds from the first grate with our underground communication gear. There's definitely someone down there, and they're responsive to tapping signals. But here's the thing that's got me concerned. The acoustics suggest they're not just trapped. They're trapped in a space that's going to flood when that scheduled maintenance happens." Captain Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Storm drain rescues were among the most dangerous operations his team handled, and when you added a flooding timeline, the risk level went through the roof. "How long do we have?" 14 minutes until the upstream valve release," Wong replied, checking his watch. "And that's assuming the city maintenance crew got the message to delay. If they didn't..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications. The German Shepherd, who had been pacing between the 3 grates with increasing agitation, suddenly stopped at the second location and began a new behavior. Instead of whimpering and pawing, he lay down flat against the grate and pressed his ear to the metal, listening intently. Danny watched the dog's behavior and walked over to join him. Without being asked, the boy copied the dog's position, lying down on the hot pavement and pressing his ear to the storm drain grate. "Danny, sweetheart, get up from there," Maya called out, but her son held up his hand in a gesture that asked for silence. For nearly a minute, the boy and the dog lay side by side, listening to sounds that no one else could hear. The rescue workers paused in their preparations, somehow understanding that this strange partnership had become central to their operation. Finally, Danny sat up, his small face serious and scared. "This one is different," he said, looking directly at Captain Rodriguez. "The person down there isn't just trapped. They're hurt bad, and the water is already starting to come in." Captain Rodriguez felt every trained instinct telling him that a 5-year-old couldn't possibly know such specific information about an underground rescue situation. But those same instincts also told him that everything about this situation was unprecedented, and if there was even a chance the boy was right, they had to act on that information. "Wong, get me a fiber optic camera on the second grade immediately," he ordered. "I want to see what we're dealing with down there." As the paramedic team began setting up their underground imaging equipment, Maya watched her son with a mixture of pride and terror. Danny had never shown any unusual abilities before today. He was a normal 5-year-old who liked trucks and dinosaurs and refused to eat vegetables. But something about this German shepherd had awakened something in him that she didn't understand. The fiber optic camera snaked down through the grate, and Wong monitored the images on a portable screen. What he saw made him immediately call for additional medical equipment. "Captain, we've got a male adult, approximately 30 to 40 years old, conscious, but appears to have significant injuries," Wong reported. "And the kid was right. There's water accumulating around his position. It's not deep yet, but it's definitely flowing in from somewhere upstream." The crowd that had gathered on the sidewalks had grown to nearly 100 people. News of the unusual rescue was spreading through social media, and local news vans were beginning to arrive. But the focus remained intensely on the small boy and the German shepherd, who had somehow known that people were in danger. Captain Rodriguez made a decision that went against standard protocol, but felt absolutely right in this unprecedented situation. "I want that dog and the boy positioned where they can see our operation," he told Officer Patel. "If they've been able to identify locations and conditions that our equipment confirmed, I want them available to provide any additional information they can." As the rescue team began the delicate process of removing the heavy grate covering the second drain, the German shepherd moved again. This time, he went to the third location he had identified and exhibited entirely different behavior. He sat perfectly still, staring down into the grate, and began making a sound none of them had heard before. A low, rhythmic whining that seemed almost like a lullaby. Danny immediately understood. He walked over to the third grate and sat down beside the dog, and to everyone's amazement, he began humming softly. The tune was simple and sweet, the kind of melody a parent might hum to comfort a frightened child. "What are they doing?" Maya asked paramedic Wong, who was monitoring the situation while his partner coordinated the equipment at the second site. Wong was quiet for a moment, listening to the gentle humming and watching the boy and dog work together in perfect synchronization. "If I had to guess," he said finally, "I'd say they're trying to keep someone calm, maybe someone who's scared and alone and needs to know that help is coming." The implications of that observation sent chills through everyone who heard it. The first location had responsive tapping, someone who was alert and able to communicate. The second location had an injured adult who was dealing with rising water. And the third location had someone who needed comfort, someone who might be too young or too frightened to respond normally to rescue attempts. Captain Rodriguez coordinated with the public works team to get multiple grates opened simultaneously. Every minute counted, and they couldn't afford to rescue people one at a time if the water was going to start flowing through the system. "Status on that maintenance delay?" he called out to Officer Patel. "Still working on it," she replied, but her voice carried doubt. "The city maintenance crew isn't responding to radio calls, and their supervisors are trying to reach them by phone. 10 minutes until the scheduled valve release." The first grate came up with a screech of metal and hydraulic pressure. Emergency lighting was immediately lowered into the opening, revealing a maintenance ladder that descended about 12 feet into a concrete tunnel. At the bottom of the ladder, visible in the bright emergency lights, was a person. Firefighter Martinez volunteered to be lowered down for the initial assessment. As he descended, his voice came through the radio communication system, so everyone above could hear the situation. "I've got an elderly female, conscious and alert," Martinez reported. "She's got some cuts and bruises, but she's stable. Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" The response was faint, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Elizabeth Santos." "I'm Elizabeth Santos. I work as a crossing guard at the elementary school. I've been down here since yesterday afternoon." A murmur went through the crowd. Elizabeth Santos was known in the neighborhood, a beloved crossing guard who helped hundreds of children safely across busy streets every day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she was now the one who needed rescuing. "How did you end up down there, Mrs. Santos?" Martinez asked, as he prepared to attach rescue lines to bring her up. "There was a kitten," she said, her voice stronger now that she knew help had arrived. "A tiny orange kitten fell through the grate, and I could hear it crying. I thought I could climb down and get it out quickly, but the ladder broke when I was climbing back up." As Martinez worked to secure Mrs. Santos for extraction, the German Shepherd's behavior became even more remarkable. He moved to a position where he could see down into the drain opening, and when Mrs. Santos came into view, he let out a soft whine of recognition. "Oh my goodness," Mrs. Santos said when she saw the dog looking down at her. "Charlie! Charlie! You found them! You brought help!" The crowd went silent. The German Shepherd had a name, and Mrs. Santos knew him. "That's my neighbor's dog," Mrs. Santos called up as Martinez prepared to lift her out. "Charlie belongs to Mr. Davis, but Mr. Davis had a heart attack last week, and he's been in the hospital. Charlie has been wandering the neighborhood, and I've been feeding him when I could." Maya felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The dog wasn't just randomly finding trapped people, he was looking for specific people, people he cared about. As Mrs. Santos was safely extracted from the first drain, the team at the second location was making progress with their more complicated rescue. The injured man was conscious but had a broken leg and possibly other injuries from what appeared to be a fall. Getting him out safely was taking precious time that they didn't have. 8 minutes until the valve release. Danny and the German Shepherd, Charlie, remained at the third grate, continuing their quiet humming and whining. The boy seemed to understand instinctively that his job was to keep whoever was down there calm while the adults handled the physical rescue. But as the minutes ticked by, Charlie's behavior began to change again. He stood up, moved away from the third grate, and returned to the second one, where the injured man was being extracted. He sat down and stared intently at the rescue operation, and then did something that made Danny gasp. Charlie pressed his nose to his own collar and whimpered, the same gesture he had made when he first approached Danny in the street. But this time, Danny could see what the dog was trying to show him. Hanging from Charlie's collar, partially hidden under his thick fur, was a small metal tag. Not just an identification tag, but a medical alert tag. And on that tag, in small but clear letters, was printed, "Service Dog in Training, Emergency Contact, Marcus Davis, Diabetic Alert." "Oh no," Danny whispered, understanding flooding through him. "The hurt man down there, Charlie's trying to tell us he's a diabetic, and he might be really, really sick." Maya's heart stopped. A diabetic trapped underground for possibly 24 hours or more, with injuries, and now with water beginning to accumulate around him. The medical implications were severe. "Captain Rodriguez!" she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the rescue site. "The dog is wearing a diabetic alert tag. The man in the second drain might be Charlie's owner, and he might be having a diabetic emergency." Captain Rodriguez immediately radioed the information to his team below. Paramedic Wong grabbed additional medical supplies from the ambulance, glucose testing equipment, emergency insulin, and IV fluids for treating diabetic shock. "Martinez, change of priorities," Captain Rodriguez called down to the second drain. "We're dealing with a possible diabetic emergency in addition to the injuries. Get me a blood sugar reading as soon as you can safely do it." As the rescue team worked frantically to extract the injured man, who was indeed Marcus Davis, Charlie's owner, the German Shepherd's behavior shifted again. He was no longer pacing or whimpering. Instead, he sat perfectly still, watching the rescue operation with intense focus. as if he understood that his part in guiding humans to the emergency was complete, and now he had to trust them to save the person he loved. 6 minutes until the valve release. Marcus Davis was successfully extracted from the second drain, unconscious now, but alive. Paramedic Wong immediately began testing his blood sugar levels while preparing IV fluids. Charlie approached the stretcher where his owner lay, whined softly once, and then returned to his position at the third grate. "His blood sugar is critically low," Wong reported. "We're talking about diabetic coma territory. He's been without food or medication for at least 24 hours. As the medical team worked to stabilize Marcus Davis, Danny realized that Charlie wasn't finished with his rescue mission. The dog was back at the third drain, and his behavior was more urgent than ever. "There's still someone else down there," Danny said, his voice small but clear in the chaos of the rescue operation. "Charlie says we can't leave without getting the third person." Captain Rodriguez looked at his watch, then at the exhausted rescue team, then at the small boy and the German shepherd who had somehow orchestrated this entire operation. 4 minutes until the scheduled valve release, one person still trapped underground, and a 5-year-old child and a service dog in training, insisting that the rescue wasn't over yet. Everything depended on the next few minutes, and whether the extraordinary partnership between Danny and Charlie could guide the rescue team to one more impossible save before time ran out completely. Captain Rodriguez faced a decision that would haunt him regardless of the outcome. With 4 minutes until the scheduled water release, his team was exhausted, equipment was running low, and they had already successfully rescued 2 people. Standard emergency protocol would be to evacuate the area and ensure the safety of his crew. But the small boy and the German shepherd were insisting there was a third person still trapped, and everything they had told his team so far had been absolutely accurate. "Martinez, how long do you need to get down to the third location and assess?" He radioed to his lead rescue specialist. "Given the setup time for safety lines and equipment, at least 6 minutes, Captain," came the reply. "Maybe 8 if there are complications." The math was brutal. They didn't have 6 minutes, let alone 8. If the water started flowing on schedule, anyone in the drain system would be in mortal danger, including his rescue team. But Charlie had other ideas about timing and protocol. The German shepherd suddenly stood up from his position beside the third grate and did something that no one expected. He walked directly to Captain Rodriguez, sat down in front of him, and began a behavior that was clearly learned, placing his right paw on the captain's boot, then looking directly into his eyes with an intensity that was unmistakably communication. "He's trying to tell you something," Danny said, walking over to stand beside Charlie. "He knows we don't have much time. He's asking you to trust him." Captain Rodriguez looked down at the service dog in training, then at the 5-year-old boy who had somehow become central to the most unusual rescue operation of his career. Every piece of training told him to prioritize the safety of his team and the people who were already saved. But 30 years of emergency response had also taught him that sometimes the most important decisions couldn't be made based on protocol alone. "What exactly is he asking me to trust him with?" Captain Rodriguez asked Danny, feeling slightly ridiculous for having a tactical conversation with a kindergartner. Danny placed his small hand on Charlie's head and seemed to listen to something only he could hear. "He says the person down there can't wait for all the ropes and big equipment. He says there's a faster way, but it's scary, and the grown-ups have to be really brave." Before Captain Rodriguez could ask for clarification, Charlie stood up and trotted over to Mr. Hendricks, who had arrived with the City Public Works Department and was operating the hydraulic lift that had been removing the heavy drain grates. Charlie sat down beside the equipment operator and repeated his paw-on-boot gesture, then looked meaningfully at the third grate, then back at Mr. Hendricks. "I think he wants me to open this one right now," Mr. Hendricks said, his voice uncertain. "But Captain, we haven't set up safety protocols for this location yet." Danny walked over to the third grate and lay down on his stomach, pressing his ear to the metal just as he had done before. But this time, his expression changed to one of pure alarm. "The water is coming now," he said, sitting up quickly. "Not in 4 minutes. Now, the person down there says they can hear it rushing toward them." As if to confirm Danny's words, a sound became audible to everyone in the area, a distant rumbling that seemed to be coming from beneath the street. The scheduled valve release had either happened early, or there was an emergency release somewhere upstream. "Captain, we need to evacuate the area immediately," Officer Patel called out. but her voice was drowned out by Charlie's response to the sound of rushing water. The German Shepherd threw back his head and let out a howl that was unlike anything any of them had heard before. It wasn't the crying or whimpering from earlier. This was the sound of an animal in pure anguish, the sound of someone who knew that a life he cared about was about to be lost. Danny responded to Charlie's distress by doing something that would be talked about in the neighborhood for years to come. The 5-year-old boy stood up, walked to Captain Rodriguez, and looked up at him, with eyes that seemed far too old for his face. "Mr. Captain," Danny said with perfect politeness and devastating clarity, "Charlie saved Mrs. Santos and Mr. Marcus. He brought you to them when nobody else knew where they were. Now he's asking you to please save one more person before the water comes. He promises he knows a way that will work." Captain Rodriguez felt every principle of emergency management warring with an instinct that told him this child and this dog represented something beyond his experience and training. The sound of rushing water was getting louder. His team was already at risk, and he was being asked to make a life-or-death decision based on the apparent communication between a kindergartner and a service animal. He made the call that would define his career. "Hendricks, open the third grate now," he ordered. "Martinez, prep for rapid descent. Minimal safety gear, maximum speed. We're going to trust our 4-legged consultant on this one." The hydraulic lift screamed as it lifted the heavy metal grating, and immediately they could all hear what Danny had been trying to tell them. There was definitely someone down there, and the sound of rushing water was getting much, much closer. But when the emergency lights illuminated the third drain opening, what they saw made everyone's heart stop. At the bottom of the access shaft was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. She was sitting on a narrow concrete ledge about 10 feet down, clutching what appeared to be a small orange kitten, and the water level around the base of the shaft was rising visibly. "Oh my God," Maya whispered. "It's a child." The little girl looked up at the bright lights and the faces peering down at her, and her voice carried clearly through the concrete shaft. "Is Charlie up there? I heard Charlie howling. I've been waiting for Charlie to bring help." Charlie immediately moved to the edge of the opening and whined softly, and the little girl's face broke into the first smile any of them had seen since the rescue began. "Hi, Charlie," she called up. "I found the kitten that Mrs. Santos was looking for, but then the ladder broke and I couldn't get back up, and the water started coming." Captain Rodriguez felt his chest tighten as he realized the full scope of what had been happening. This wasn't 3 separate accidents. This was one interconnected emergency. Mrs. Santos had gone down to rescue a kitten. The ladder had broken, stranding her in the system. Marcus Davis, Charlie's diabetic owner, had apparently tried to help with the rescue and had fallen and been injured. And this little girl had gone looking for the kitten herself when the adults disappeared. Charlie had known all along that 3 people he cared about were trapped underground, and he had been desperately trying to get human help for all of them before something terrible happened. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Martinez called down as he prepared for the fastest rescue, descent of his career. "Emma," the little girl replied. "Emma Chen. Mrs. Santos watches me after school sometimes, and Charlie plays with me in the park. Are Mrs. Santos and Mr. Marcus okay?" "They're going to be fine," Martinez assured her as he clipped into his rapid descent gear. "And so are you. Can you tell me about the water down there?" Emma looked around at the rising water with the calm assessment that only children seemed capable of in crisis situations. "It's getting higher pretty fast," she said matter-of-factly. "Maybe up to my ankles now. The kitten doesn't like it, but I'm holding him up high so he stays dry." The sound of rushing water was getting much louder, and everyone could see that the water level in the shaft was rising steadily. Martinez had maybe 2 minutes to get down there, secure Emma and the kitten, and get back up before the space became too dangerous for extraction. But Charlie wasn't finished helping. As Martinez began his rapid descent, Charlie did something that amazed even Danny, who had become accustomed to the dog's remarkable communication abilities. Charlie went to Danny's rocket-shaped lunchbox, which had been set aside during the rescue operations, and began pawing at it insistently. "He wants something from my lunchbox," Danny told his mother, opening the container to see what Charlie needed. Inside were Danny's lunch items from what felt like hours ago, but had actually been less than 2 hours. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, a bag of crackers, and a juice box with a flexible straw. Charlie immediately focused on the juice box, touching it with his nose, and then looking at Danny with unmistakable urgency. "The juice," Danny said, understanding immediately. "Emma's been down there for a long time. She probably needs to drink something." But how could they get a juice box down to a little girl in a flooding storm drain while a firefighter was trying to execute a high-speed rescue? Danny solved the problem with the creative logic that only a 5-year-old could provide. He took the juice box, carefully taped the flexible straw to the outside so it wouldn't get lost, and handed it to Martinez just as the firefighter reached the bottom of the shaft. "For Emma," Danny called down. "Charlie says she's probably really thirsty." Martinez took the juice box and immediately understood the brilliance of the gesture. Emma had been trapped underground for hours, possibly without food or water, and while she seemed remarkably calm and resilient, she was probably dehydrated and exhausted. "Emma, I've got some juice for you," Martinez said as he reached her position. "Can you drink a little bit while I get you and your kitten friend ready to go up?" The little girl accepted the juice box with the grateful politeness that made all the adults above ground want to simultaneously cheer and cry. As she took small sips through the straw, Martinez worked quickly to secure her in the rescue harness. "Is the kitten coming with us?" Emma asked as the water continued to rise around them. "Absolutely," Martinez replied, making sure the orange kitten was safely secured in Emma's arms before beginning the extraction. "Nobody gets left behind today." As Martinez and Emma began their ascent, with the rescued kitten meowing indignantly about the whole experience, the sound of rushing water reached a crescendo. Water was now flowing rapidly through the storm drain system, and if they had waited even 5 more minutes, the rescue would have been impossible. When Emma emerged from the shaft, still clutching the orange kitten and wearing Martinez's rescue harness, the crowd that had gathered burst into spontaneous applause. But Emma only had eyes for Charlie, who was waiting for her at the edge of the opening. "Charlie!" she exclaimed, and the German shepherd's tail wagged so hard his entire body wiggled with joy. "You brought help, just like you always do. You're the best dog in the whole world." Charlie approached Emma gently, sniffed the kitten to make sure it was unharmed, and then sat down beside the little girl with the satisfied expression of a job well done. As paramedics checked Emma's condition and ensured she didn't need medical treatment, Captain Rodriguez looked at his watch and realized that the entire third rescue, from the decision to proceed to Emma's safe extraction, had taken exactly 3.5 minutes, impossible by every standard of emergency response. But it had happened because a service dog in training had guided them to a solution that prioritized speed over protocol, and because a 5-year-old boy had trusted that guidance completely. Maya looked at her son, who was now sitting cross-legged on the pavement beside Charlie and Emma, sharing his crackers with both the little girl and the rescued kitten. Less than 3 hours ago, Danny had been a normal kindergartner waiting for a traffic light to change. Now, he had helped coordinate a multi-victim rescue operation and had formed a partnership with a service animal that had saved 3 lives. The water rushing through the storm drain system below was now flowing at full capacity, and the shafts they had just rescued people from were completely flooded. If Charlie hadn't somehow known exactly where to find help, if Danny hadn't been able to understand the dog's desperate communications, if the rescue team hadn't trusted an unprecedented situation enough to act on information from a child and an animal. Maya didn't want to think about how differently this day could have ended, but it wasn't quite over yet. As the emergency vehicles prepared to transport Mrs. Santos and Marcus Davis to the hospital for evaluation, and as Emma was reunited with her worried parents who had been searching for her since she disappeared that morning, one more surprise was waiting. Marcus Davis, conscious now thanks to the IV glucose treatment, was sitting up on his stretcher and asking for Charlie. When the German Shepherd approached his owner, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made Danny gasp with recognition. It was a small, official-looking badge, the kind that service dogs wore when they completed their training and became certified working animals. Charlie was supposed to get this next week, Marcus said weakly but with obvious pride. He was 1 week away from finishing his service dog certification, but I think what he did today proves he was ready all along. Captain Rodriguez, who had been observing the reunion between Marcus and Charlie, stepped forward with something none of them expected. "Mr. Davis," he said formally, "I'm going to be writing a report about today's events that's going to be read by a lot of people in emergency services. And I'm going to recommend that Charlie be awarded a civilian service commendation for his actions today. What he did, guiding us to 3 trapped victims using communication methods we don't even understand. That's not just remarkable animal behavior. That's heroism. As the afternoon sun began to set over Central Avenue, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that matched the rescued kitten's fur, the story of Danny and Charlie was already beginning to spread through the city. But for the small group of people who had lived through those impossible 3 hours, it wasn't a story yet. It was a transformation that had changed how they understood the connections between humans and animals, between children and adults, and between the everyday world and the miraculous. The immediate aftermath of the rescue brought a flurry of activity that felt almost anticlimactic after the intensity of the emergency. Paramedics were completing their assessments, fire department personnel were securing the storm drain openings, and police officers were taking statements from witnesses. But underneath the routine post-emergency procedures, something deeper was happening. Marcus Davis, still weak from his diabetic episode but insisting on staying conscious, watched as Charlie continued to move between the 3 people he had helped save. The dog would spend a few minutes with Mrs. Santos as she sat in the ambulance, then trot over to check on Emma, who was being examined by pediatric paramedics, then return to Marcus's side before repeating the cycle. "He's been doing that since he was a puppy," Marcus explained to Danny, who had positioned himself where he could observe Charlie's behavior. Checking on everyone he thinks is his responsibility. That's why they picked him for service dog training. He has this natural instinct to take care of people. But what Marcus couldn't explain was how Charlie had known that those specific people were in danger when no one else had any idea they were missing. Mrs. Santos lived alone and wasn't expected anywhere until her evening shift as a crossing guard. Emma had told her parents she was going to play at the park after school and wouldn't be missed until dinner time. Marcus himself had been planning to spend the day at home recovering from a minor illness, and no one would have looked for him until he failed to show up for a doctor's appointment the next morning. Without Charlie's intervention, all 3 of them could have been trapped in the storm drain system when the scheduled water release happened. The outcome would have been tragic. Dr. Patricia Wong, the pediatric emergency physician who had been called to evaluate Emma, was having a difficult time understanding what she was seeing. Emma showed no signs of trauma, dehydration, or panic, despite having been trapped underground for several hours. In fact, the little girl seemed remarkably calm and kept asking if she could help take care of the rescued kitten. "Emma, can you tell me what happened after you went down into the drain?" Dr. Wong asked gently as she checked the girl's reflexes and vital signs. Emma's explanation was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone that children used when they didn't realize their experiences were unusual. "Well, I heard Mrs. Santos calling for help yesterday, but when I went to look for grown-ups to help her, nobody was around. So I went down to see if I could help her myself, but the ladder was broken and I couldn't get back up." "Weren't you scared?" Dr. Wong asked. Emma considered this seriously. "A little bit, but I found the kitten that Mrs. Santos was trying to save, and taking care of him made me feel better. And I knew Charlie would figure out how to get help for us. He always does." The casual confidence with which Emma expressed her faith in Charlie's abilities struck Dr. Wong as significant. This wasn't a child creating fantasy scenarios to cope with trauma. This was a child who had genuine, experience-based trust in a specific animal's problem-solving abilities. Captain Rodriguez was having his own revelations as he completed his incident report. In 30 years of emergency response, he had never written a report that included phrases like "civilian dog identified victim locations" and "child interpreter facilitated animal-human communication." But he had also never been part of a rescue operation that had been so successful under such impossible circumstances. The timeline alone was extraordinary. From the moment Officer Patel had first noticed the traffic disturbance caused by Charlie's behavior to the completion of the 3rd rescue had been less than 4 hours. A typical multi-victim underground rescue operation would take 8 to 12 hours with extensive preparation and equipment. They had done it in a fraction of that time because they had received precise information about victim locations, conditions, and medical needs from sources that shouldn't have been able to provide such information. As Captain Rodriguez interviewed Danny for his report, he found himself asking questions that felt more like philosophy than emergency management. "Danny, when you say Charlie was telling you things, What exactly did that mean? Did you hear words? Danny scrunched up his face in the way children did when they tried to explain something they understood intuitively, but couldn't easily put into language. Not exactly words like when people talk, Danny said slowly. More like feelings and pictures. Like when Charlie looked at the first drain and cried, I could feel that he was scared for Mrs. Santos, and he wanted someone to go help her. And when he showed me his collar tag, I could picture Mr. Marcus needing his medicine. And what about Emma? How did you know she needed comfort? Charlie felt sad and protective, like when my mom hums to me when I have a bad dream. So I knew there was someone little who was scared and needed to know someone cared about them. Captain Rodriguez wrote down Danny's explanation, but he knew that no one reading his report would truly understand what had happened at Central Avenue that afternoon. The connection between the boy and the dog had been real and had directly resulted in saving 3 lives, but it existed in a space between scientific understanding and everyday miracle that emergency services weren't equipped to document. Maya, meanwhile, was struggling with her own questions about what she had witnessed. As a practical person who worked in accounting and believed in logical explanations for everything, she was having difficulty processing the fact that her 5-year-old son had apparently developed the ability to communicate with animals in ways that had never happened before. Danny, she said, as they sat together on a bench while the emergency crews finished their work, has anything like this ever happened before? Have you ever been able to understand what animals were thinking? Danny leaned against his mother's side and considered her question carefully. Not like this, he said finally. But sometimes I think I understand what our neighbor's cat wants when she sits by our door. And at the zoo, some of the animals seem like they're trying to tell me things. I just never paid attention before because grown-ups always say animals can't really talk. The implications of Danny's answer sent a chill through Maya. How many times had adults dismissed children's claims about animal communication as imagination? How many potential connections had been lost because the adult world didn't have frameworks for understanding interspecies communication? Mrs. Santos, who had refused transport to the hospital despite her injuries, approached Maya and Danny as the official interviews were concluding. The elderly crossing guard moved slowly and carefully, but her eyes were bright with determination. I need to thank your son properly, Mrs. Santos said to Maya, and I need to tell you something about Charlie that I think you should know. Mrs. Santos sat down on the bench beside Danny and took his small hands in her weathered ones. Danny, what you did today was the most important thing that's ever happened on this street. Charlie has been trying to help people in this neighborhood for months, but until today, no one understood what he was trying to tell us. What do you mean? Maya asked. Charlie's been showing up at accidents before they happen, Mrs. Santos explained. Last month, he sat outside the pharmacy for 2 hours before Mr. Kim had his stroke inside. The month before that, he wouldn't leave Mrs. Patterson's front yard, and that evening she fell and broke her hip. We all thought it was coincidence. Danny looked up at Mrs. Santos with wide eyes. He's been trying to help people for a long time? Yes, sweetheart, but nobody could understand him until you came along. Charlie needed someone who could hear what he was really saying. As Mrs. Santos spoke, Charlie approached their group and sat down directly in front of Danny. The dog's behavior was different now. Calmer, more settled, as if completing the rescue operation had fulfilled some deep purpose that had been driving him. Emma Chen, who had been cleared by the pediatric team and was waiting for her parents to complete paperwork, joined their gathering with the orange kitten still clutched in her arms. Mrs. Santos, Emma said, I think this kitten belongs to the Johnson family on Maple Street. He looks just like the kitten they put up posters about last week. Mrs. Santos smiled, and Maya realized that even the kitten rescue was part of a larger pattern of community connection that had been interrupted when Mrs. Santos, Marcus, and Emma had all become trapped trying to help each other. The revelation that came next changed everything they thought they understood about what had happened. Marcus Davis, who had been sitting quietly in the ambulance while receiving continued IV fluids, suddenly called out to the group. Charlie, come here, boy. I want to show these people something. When Charlie approached, Marcus reached into a small bag that had been recovered from the storm drain, along with his personal effects. From the bag, he pulled out a worn notebook filled with handwritten entries. This is Charlie's training log, Marcus explained. Every service dog in training has to have documented evidence of their abilities and the situations they've encountered during their preparation. Marcus opened the notebook and showed them pages of entries, each dated and detailed. The entries from the past 3 months told an incredible story. September 15th, Charlie exhibited unusual alert behavior outside Morrison's grocery. Investigated and found elderly customer had fallen in back aisle, unable to call for help. October 3rd, Charlie refused to leave position outside apartment building on Cedar Street. Building manager found gas leak in basement 2 hours later. October 28th, Charlie consistently alerted to parked car on Elm Street. Police investigation found unconscious driver having diabetic emergency. Entry after entry documented Charlie's apparent ability to detect people in distress before human emergency services were aware of problems. But until today, Marcus had been the only person who understood that Charlie's behavior represented actual emergency alerts rather than random animal actions. The training program was going to wash Charlie out, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with emotion. They said his alerts were too frequent and not specific enough to standard service dog protocols. They didn't understand that Charlie wasn't just trained to detect my diabetic episodes. He was naturally gifted at detecting anyone's medical or safety emergencies. Maya felt her understanding of the day's events shift completely. Charlie hadn't randomly stumbled across 3 people trapped in storm drains. He had been systematically monitoring the safety and well-being of people throughout the neighborhood. And when Mrs. Santos, Marcus himself, and Emma had all disappeared into dangerous situations, Charlie had escalated his response to the level of stopping traffic and demanding human intervention. So today, Maya said slowly, when Charlie was crying in the street, he was staging an intervention, Marcus finished. He knew 3 people he was responsible for protecting were in immediate danger, and he needed to find humans who could understand emergency situations and coordinate rescue efforts. Danny looked up at Charlie with newfound respect. You weren't just asking for help. You were asking for the right kind of help. Charlie's tail wagged once, slowly, as if acknowledging that Danny had finally understood the full scope of what had been happening. Captain Rodriguez, who had been listening to Marcus's explanation, felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Mr. Davis, are you saying that Charlie has been functioning as an unofficial neighborhood emergency detection system? More than that, Marcus replied. Charlie has been trying to prevent emergencies by alerting to dangerous situations before they become critical. But without a way to communicate his alerts to people who could take action, he's been limited to what one dog can do alone. The implications were staggering. If Charlie's abilities were real and reliable, and if Danny could consistently interpret Charlie's communications, they represented a potential revolution in community emergency response. Early detection of medical emergencies, accidents, and dangerous situations could save countless lives and prevent tragedies before they happened. But even more significant was what had been proven about the possibility of meaningful communication between humans and animals. Danny and Charlie had demonstrated that barriers between species weren't as absolute as everyone had assumed, and that under the right circumstances, cooperation between humans and animals could achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. As the sun continued to set and the last of the emergency vehicles prepared to leave Central Avenue, one more surprise was waiting for everyone who had been part of the rescue. Mr. Chen, Emma's father, approached the group with tears in his eyes and his phone in his hand. I just got off the phone with Channel 7 News, he said. Someone in the crowd recorded video of the whole rescue and posted it online. It's already been shared thousands of times. Maya felt her stomach drop. The idea of her son and their experience becoming a viral news story filled her with anxiety about privacy and unwanted attention. But Mr. Chen's next words put her fears into perspective. The video is being shared by emergency services departments across the country, he continued. Fire departments, police departments, animal rescue organizations, they're all trying to understand what happened here today. This isn't just local news. This is something that could change how we think about emergency response everywhere. As if to underscore the significance of the moment, Charlie suddenly stood up from his position beside Danny and walked to the exact spot in the street where he had been crying for help just a few hours earlier. He sat down in that spot, looked around at all the people whose lives had been changed by the events of the afternoon, and let out one soft, satisfied whine. It was the sound of a job well done, a mission completed, and a new chapter beginning for everyone who had learned that the world was far more connected and communicative than they had ever imagined possible. 3 weeks later, Central Avenue looked exactly the same as it had before the rescue, but everything about the neighborhood had fundamentally changed. The storm drain grates had been repaired and reinforced. The construction zone had been cleared, and traffic flowed normally through the intersection, where Charlie had once stood crying for help. But the invisible connections between the people who lived and worked in the area had been permanently altered. Maya walked Danny to school every morning now, and their route always took them past the spot where the rescue had happened. Each morning, Charlie was there waiting for them, not because he needed help, but because he had appointed himself as the unofficial guardian of everyone who traveled that stretch of Central Avenue. "Good morning, Charlie," Danny would say, and Charlie would fall into step beside them, escorting them safely to the school entrance before returning to his morning patrol route through the neighborhood. Danny's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had noticed changes in him since the rescue. He was more confident when speaking in class, more willing to help other children who seemed upset or confused, and he had developed an unusual ability to notice when something was wrong before adults picked up on problems. Danny seems to have a heightened awareness of other people's needs, Ms. Rodriguez explained to Maya during their parent-teacher conference. "Yesterday, he told me that Sarah was going to have a really bad day, and I should probably call her parents. I thought it was just a 5-year-old's random comment, but 2 hours later, Sarah's grandmother had a heart attack and Sarah had to leave school to go to the hospital." Maya wasn't entirely surprised. Since the rescue, Danny had been making observations about people and situations that proved to be remarkably accurate. He would mention that their elderly neighbors seemed worried about something, and the next day they would learn that she had received concerning news from her doctor. He would suggest that they check on the family down the street, and they would discover that the father had lost his job, and the family was struggling with groceries. It was as if Danny's experience communicating with Charlie had opened up channels of perception that extended beyond animals to include a deeper understanding of human needs and emotions. Marcus Davis was experiencing his own transformation. The diabetic episode that had led to his rescue had been a wake-up call about his health management, but it had also been the beginning of something extraordinary. The service dog training program that had been ready to dismiss Charlie as unsuitable had completely reversed their assessment after reviewing the detailed reports of the rescue operation. "We've never had a service animal demonstrate such sophisticated emergency detection and coordination abilities," Dr. Amanda Foster, the program director, explained to Marcus during their meeting. Charlie's actions that day represented a level of problem-solving and communication that goes far beyond our standard training protocols. But the program was also grappling with larger questions about what Charlie's abilities meant for the future of service animal training. If Charlie could detect emergencies involving people other than his designated handler, and if he could coordinate rescue efforts by communicating with humans who had the ability to understand him, it suggested possibilities for service animals that no one had previously considered. "We're looking at developing an entirely new category of service animal certification," Dr. Foster continued. "Community emergency detection animals. Charlie would be the prototype for a program that could place specially gifted animals in neighborhoods where they could provide early warning systems for medical emergencies, accidents, and dangerous situations." Marcus felt a surge of pride as he looked at Charlie, who was sitting beside his chair with the calm dignity of an animal who understood the importance of the conversation taking place. What would that mean for Charlie and me? It would mean that Charlie's official duties would extend beyond managing your diabetes to include monitoring the safety and well-being of people in your immediate community. You would essentially become the handler for a neighborhood emergency response animal. The idea was both exciting and overwhelming. Marcus had gotten Charlie to help manage a medical condition. He hadn't expected to become part of a revolutionary approach to community safety. But the most significant changes were happening with Emma Chen and her family. Emma's calm behavior during her underground ordeal had impressed the child psychologists who evaluated her, but what was more remarkable was the way she had processed the entire experience. "Emma doesn't seem to view what happened as traumatic," Dr. Sarah Kim, the child psychiatrist, explained to Emma's parents. "She talks about it as an adventure, where she got to help save a kitten, and where she learned that Charlie was even more amazing than she had already thought he was." Emma had also developed a special relationship with the orange kitten she had rescued. The kitten, who had indeed belonged to the Johnson family as Emma suspected, had been returned to his owners, but the Johnsons had made an arrangement that allowed Emma to visit and help care for him regularly. Emma has a natural gift for animal care, Mrs. Johnson told Emma's mother. She seems to understand what animals need in ways that are really unusual for someone her age. Emma's parents were considering whether to encourage their daughter's apparent talents by enrolling her in veterinary science programs or animal behavior classes designed for gifted children. But they were also careful to ensure that Emma's childhood remained as normal as possible, despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her special abilities to light. Mrs. Santos had returned to her job as a crossing guard, but with some significant changes to her daily routine. Charlie now accompanied her during her shifts, positioning himself where he could monitor both the children crossing the street and the general safety of the intersection. It's like having a partner who never gets tired and never misses anything, Mrs. Santos explained to the school principal, who had initially been concerned about having a large dog present during school dismissal times. Charlie notices things that I might miss. Kids who seem upset, drivers who are distracted, situations that might become problems before they actually do become problems. The arrangement had been so successful that the school district was considering a pilot program to place specially trained animals at multiple school crossing locations throughout the city. But perhaps the most unexpected development had been the formation of what the neighbors informally called the Central Avenue Watch Network. The group consisted of Danny, Emma, Mrs. Santos, Marcus, and several other residents who had been affected by the rescue or who had witnessed the extraordinary communication between Danny and Charlie. The network met weekly at Maya's house, ostensibly to check on everyone's well-being and to coordinate neighborhood safety efforts. But the real purpose of the meetings was to support and develop the unique abilities that had been revealed during the rescue. Danny practiced his animal communication skills with Charlie and with other pets in the neighborhood. Emma worked on developing her animal care and emergency response capabilities. Mrs. Santos and Marcus shared their knowledge of neighborhood patterns and potential safety concerns. Maya coordinated with local emergency services to ensure that any unusual observations or concerns could be properly reported and investigated. The network had already prevented several potential emergencies. Charlie had alerted to a gas leak at the corner market 3 days before city inspectors would have discovered it during their routine inspection. Danny had noticed that the elderly man who lived alone on Maple Street seemed confused and distressed, leading to the discovery that he was experiencing early symptoms of a stroke. Emma had observed that several cats in the neighborhood were avoiding a particular area near the old warehouse, leading to the discovery of illegally dumped chemical materials that were creating a health hazard. Captain Rodriguez had become an unofficial liaison between the Central Avenue Watch Network and the city's emergency services. He attended their monthly meetings and helped them understand how to properly document and report their observations. "What you're creating here is unique," Captain Rodriguez told the group during one of their meetings. "You're developing a community-based early warning system that combines human observation skills with animal sensory abilities and emergency response protocols. I've never seen anything like it." But the captain also helped them understand the limitations and responsibilities that came with their unusual capabilities. Not every concern would turn out to be a real emergency. Not every animal behavior indicated a problem. And it was crucial that they work within established emergency response systems rather than trying to handle dangerous situations on their own. "Your job is detection and communication," Captain Rodriguez emphasized. "When you identify a potential problem, you report it through proper channels and let trained emergency personnel handle the response. What happened 3 weeks ago was extraordinary, but it was also extremely dangerous, and we can't have civilians regularly putting themselves at risk." The story of the Central Avenue rescue had indeed spread far beyond their neighborhood. The video that Mr. Chen had mentioned had been viewed millions of times, and news crews from across the country had come to interview Danny, Charlie, and the other people involved in the rescue. But Maya had been careful to control Danny's exposure to media attention. A 5-year-old boy with apparent animal communication abilities could easily become the subject of exploitative coverage or unwanted attention from people who wanted to use his gifts for profit or publicity. "Danny's abilities are real," Maya explained, to a researcher from the university who wanted to study her son's communication with animals. But he's also a little boy who needs to have a normal childhood. We're willing to cooperate with legitimate research that might help other people, but we're not going to turn Danny into a curiosity or a test subject. The researcher, Dr. Michael Torres from the university's Animal Behavior Department, was understanding about Maya's concerns, but he was also excited about the scientific implications of what Danny could do. If we can understand how Danny communicates with animals, we might be able to teach those techniques to other people, Dr. Torres explained. The applications for emergency response, animal welfare, conservation efforts, and even medical research could be revolutionary. Dr. Torres proposed a carefully designed study that would allow Danny to work with Charlie and other animals in controlled settings, while researchers documented the communication methods and measured their effectiveness. The study would be designed to feel like play rather than testing, and Danny would have complete control over his participation. After much discussion with Marcus, Mrs. Santos, Emma's parents, and Captain Rodriguez, Maya agreed to allow Danny to participate in the research, but with strict conditions about privacy, safety, and the right to withdraw from the study at any time. The first research session had taken place the previous week, and the results had been remarkable. In a controlled environment, Danny had successfully identified the location of hidden objects, based on information communicated by Charlie. He had determined which of several people in a room was experiencing physical discomfort. He had even detected when one of the research assistants was feeling anxious about a family problem, based on observations of how the room's resident therapy cat was behaving around different people. The communication appears to be based on a combination of extremely subtle visual cues, body language interpretation, and what can only be described as empathic perception, Dr. Torres explained to Maya after reviewing the session videos. Danny seems to be naturally gifted at reading emotional and physical states in both animals and humans, and Charlie appears to be exceptionally skilled at directing human attention to important information. But the research had also confirmed what Maya already knew, that Danny's abilities worked best when he felt safe, supported, and free to trust his instincts without pressure to perform or prove anything. As the weeks passed, life in the neighborhood settled into a new normal that incorporated the extraordinary alongside the everyday. Children played in the parks under Charlie's watchful protection. Adults went about their daily routines with the knowledge that an informal but effective safety network was monitoring their community. Emergency services in the city had modified their protocols to include reports from the Central Avenue Watch Network as potentially reliable sources of early warning information. But the most significant change was in how people in the neighborhood related to each other and to the animals that shared their community. Pet owners paid more attention to their animals' behavior and what it might be communicating about the environment. Parents listened more carefully when their children made observations about people or situations that seemed unusual. Elderly residents knew that their well-being was being monitored by caring neighbors who would notice quickly if something was wrong. The orange kitten that Emma had rescued had become something of a neighborhood mascot, and his recovery and integration back into the Johnson family had been followed with interest by everyone who had been part of the rescue story. The kitten, now named Hero in honor of the circumstances of his rescue, had appointed himself as Charlie's apprentice and could often be seen following the German Shepherd on his morning patrols through the area. 1 month after the rescue, Mayor Patricia Williams held a small ceremony at the intersection of Central and Fifth Avenue to formally recognize the contributions of everyone who had been involved in the emergency response. The ceremony was deliberately low-key to avoid turning the participants into celebrities, but it served an important function in acknowledging how extraordinary cooperation had led to extraordinary results. "What happened here represents the best of our community," Mayor Williams said as she presented Charlie with an official service commendation and Danny with a certificate recognizing his role in the rescue. When people work together, when they listen to each other and trust each other, when they're willing to believe in possibilities that go beyond their everyday experience, amazing things can happen. But even as Mayor Williams spoke, Charlie's attention was focused elsewhere. The dog had positioned himself where he could see the entire intersection, and his ears were moving constantly as he monitored sounds and activities throughout the area. Halfway through the mayor's speech, Charlie suddenly stood up and took 3 steps toward a parked city bus at the nearby stop. His posture changed to the alert stance that Danny had learned to recognize as an emergency signal. Danny immediately moved to Charlie's side and placed his hand on the dog's back, using the connection they had developed to understand what Charlie was detecting. "There's something wrong with the bus," Danny said quietly to his mother. "Charlie says something smells bad, and there's a weird sound." Maya looked toward the bus, which appeared completely normal to her, then at Captain Rodriguez, who was attending the ceremony. The captain had learned to take Danny and Charlie's alerts seriously, and he immediately approached the bus to investigate. What he found was a small electrical fire starting in the engine compartment, a situation that could have quickly become dangerous for passengers and bystanders if it had gone undetected for even a few more minutes. As Captain Rodriguez coordinated with the bus driver to evacuate passengers and called for fire department response, Mayor Williams looked at Danny and Charlie with amazement. "Does this happen often?" she asked Maya. "More often than we expected," Maya replied, watching as Charlie calmly monitored the evacuation and firefighting efforts to ensure that everyone was safe. "We're still learning what Charlie's capabilities really are." As the ceremony concluded and the bus fire was safely extinguished, Danny walked over to the spot where Charlie had first stood crying for help 5 weeks earlier. The intersection looked exactly the same, but Danny now understood that Charlie had been protecting this community long before anyone realized what he was doing. "Thank you for choosing me to help you," Danny said to Charlie, and the German Shepherd's tail wagged once in acknowledgement of a partnership that had changed everything for everyone it touched. From that day forward, the story of Danny and Charlie became more than just a rescue story. It became proof that the world was full of connections waiting to be discovered, voices waiting to be heard, and miracles waiting to happen when people were brave enough to listen to what seemed impossible. The bond between a 5-year-old boy and a service dog in training had shown an entire community that heroism came in all forms, that communication happened in ways beyond words, and that the most important emergencies were often prevented by paying attention to the smallest signals from the most unexpected sources. If this incredible story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with everyone you know, and subscribe to hear more amazing stories of courage, connection, and the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world.